Nice. Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to get started now. Thanks for coming. This is a book proposal workshop. Let me introduce myself a little bit. You all know me, but let me introduce myself. Oh, wait, I want to mute all. So, where was that? I thought I knew where that was easily. I don't see it, but I'm not going to worry. It looks like people are being quiet. So I'm just going to continue. If there's any noise and we get stuck, I'm going to have to stop and try to figure out how to mute all, but I think we're good for now. So to re-begin, I'm here today as a writer. I do lots of other things. I coach, I train creativity coaches. I work in the areas called critical psychology and critical psychiatry, also sometimes called anti-psychiatry. We are folks who don't believe in the current mental disorder paradigm, but that's a long story for another day. I'm here as a writer. I've been writing for 50 or so years. I started my first novel, a picaresque novel set in Korea where I'd been stationed. Started that novel when I was about 24. So that's 50 years of writing. I've written 50 or 60 books in that time and sold most of them based on book proposals. So I know something about book proposals. I also help clients create book proposals that typically help them sell the book. In my 20s, I worked as a ghostwriter. I actually supported myself by writing in my 20s, which is unusual. And in my 30s, and then I was writing fiction also, writing novels, well-received novels that were making no money. And then I retooled as a therapist and started writing nonfiction. I've mostly been writing nonfiction for the last 35 or 40 years. So what we're talking about today is something that you may or may not know about, off in the corner of consciousness, or you may know about it very well, but it's the thing called the book proposal. It's usually called the nonfiction book proposal because it's usually used by nonfiction writers and not novelists or memoirists, but I'm going to argue that novelists and memoirists ought to get to familiarize themselves with this book proposal and maybe create one themselves for their book. Let me get started. I hope the PowerPoint moves. That's what I'm going to see next if it moves. Yes, okay. So what is a book proposal? It's a book flying in space, sort of a Harry Potter-ish book flying in space. So a book proposal is an author's sales tool. That's what it is primarily. It's something that you provide to either literary agents or editors at publishing houses, or both. For nonfiction writers, it's pretty much a required sales tool. If you approach an agent without one, an agent is going to say, "Where's your book proposal?" And if you approach editors, they also will, if not ask for a book proposal, they'll ask for the things that are in a book proposal. So essentially, they will be asking for a book proposal also. So as I say, this is typically the task of the nonfiction writer and the main sales tool of the nonfiction writer. By the way, there'll be things that I remember as we go along that I'll have to parenthesize. Parenthetically, what this means for the nonfiction writer is don't write your book, write your book proposal, because agents and editors want to see the nonfiction book proposal before the book is completed, way before the book is completed, so that for editors, they have a chance to get their fingerprints on the book, make the book better, so to speak, in their estimation. So it's very important that nonfiction writers get to understand the book proposal, because this is something that's earlier in the process than they may imagine. This is not the case for fiction writers or memoirists. There you typically want the book completed, and then you create the book proposal after the novel or the memoir is written. So that's a big difference between memoir and novel on the one hand, and a nonfiction book on the other hand. So number 4, I think this is a valuable exercise for fiction writers and memoirists, not even just valuable, but maybe semi-essential. It's real work, often comes in at 30, 40, 50, 60 pages of stuff. You'll see why. This is not an afternoon's work. What you are doing is two things with the book proposal. First, you're intriguing an agent or an editor. You're getting them interested, but you're also giving them ammunition, because a literary agent has to convince an editor to buy your book. She needs ammunition. She needs to be providing reasons why a publishing house should pick your book rather than the 1,000 other books that they could pick. And you're also giving editors ammunition. That sounds a little funny. What do editors need ammunition for? Well, in the modern world of publishing, there are multiple editors at a publishing house, and they're competing for slots in their publishing house's list. So picture a room with 14 people, 6 marketing folks, the president of the company, 7 editors, etc. And editor A says, I'd like to publish this book. And editor B, your editor, your advocate says, my book's a better bet because look at all of these good reasons that the author is giving for publishing this book. So there's a competition inside houses for publication, and that's why you're providing ammunition for editors as well as literary agents. Sorry, just every once in a while I'm admitting someone, so forgive that. The task is a strategic one. You have to get literary and academic and comprehensive, those kinds of words out of your head. This is a sales tool where you're presenting your best reasons for somebody to represent or publish this book. And from my point of view, it is relatively standardized, and I'm going to explain exactly what the standards are, but it's not one size fits all. And if in your case, you want to emphasize your credentials because they're wonderful, or emphasize your connections because they're wonderful, or emphasize the largeness of the current markets for your book, that is, you may emphasize one thing or another. Your book proposal will probably look pretty standardized, but it may have larger sections of one sort or another than another book proposal. And then last but not least, and I think I've already communicated this to you, I think it's important that you create this, namely that it's likely the difference between the book being published or not being published. It's that important. It's the difference, or it's a real difference maker. So just a couple of preliminary questions answered. When does the book proposal get prepared if you're a nonfiction writer? Early. And by early, I mean once you have a good sense of what your book is about and maybe have a chapter in progress that's beginning to be okay, that's the time to begin on the book proposal. For a fiction writer or a memoirist, you can wait way until the end, except I think it's good to have folders for the book proposal set up early on so you can drop in your good thoughts for the book proposal all along, even while you're writing your novel or your memoir. You might come across, you know how this happens all day long, somebody sends you some email about some marketing idea, and you say to yourself, wow, that's a good idea, and it goes in one ear and out the other. If you have a folder for marketing ideas, you could drop that. By folder, I mean desktop folder. I don't mean a physical one, though it might be a physical one. But you could drop that good idea into that folder and have it available for when you eventually turn to writing the book proposal. So who's the book proposal for? Typically literary agents. That is typically, by the way, if you're self-publishing, none of this is relevant. You all understand that. You do not have to create a book proposal for your own book if you're meaning to self-publish. So this is for traditional publishing we're talking about. The book proposal is typically for literary agents who use it when they decide to represent your book to editors. But it can also be for editors, especially for editors at what's called niche presses, small presses, or university presses. We'll come to that a little further down. Do you need a book proposal if you're self-publishing? No. I mean, there are things in the book proposal that you need to know as a self-publisher, namely how you're going to market and promote your book. So in a certain sense, you will be familiarizing yourself with the elements of the book proposal as you take your book to market, but you don't need a formal book proposal. Number 4, do you need a book proposal if you're aiming at a niche press, small press, or university press? Absolutely. Because internally, there is the same competition at all of those presses for slots. So a university press might get 100 inquiries a day from academics looking to have their dissertation reformed into a book. And so the poor editor at this little university press has to make decisions. And if your query comes in with a strong book proposal, you're more likely to get the nod than somebody else. Number 5, can you give this task to somebody else? Nope. Really not, because this has to be in your voice and it has to be your best ideas. And if you were to put it in your voice and your best ideas and then give it to somebody else, you will already have done the work. Obviously, you can show it to somebody else to get some feedback or to get some proofreading or some copy editing. But basically, this is a task you have to do. And last, when does the book proposal get shown? To say it simply, early on, if it's a nonfiction book, maybe 2 or 3 months into the beginning of writing that book, you're ready to get a book proposal circulating, perhaps. And if it's memoir or fiction, once the book is done. Or if it's very close to being done, that is if you see the horizon on your book and you know it's going to be done in a month, you could start circulating the book proposal then, because things take time and it would be safe to circulate it at that point. Why might you try to avoid this task? And you will. Bet you a nickel. Even with my help, you will try to avoid this task. It's hard work. It's seriously hard work. Takes way more time than you want it to. You say the phrase book proposal yourself. You say the phrase book proposal to yourself and you think, well, that's, maybe a long weekend. Nope. It's days and days and days and days of stuff. It demands that you know what your book is about. And if you're a typical writer, you don't know your book that well, often until the midway or even longer than that before your book really has settled into place so that you understand what it's really about. So the book proposal does demand that you understand your book. Actually, what it demands is that you understand a snapshot of your book. That is, that you understand your book at a moment in time, because you might present a book proposal for a book and the book might change even after the book proposal starts circulating, as odd as that sounds. But if you're still working on the book might shift. And I can explain how to take that into account. But the main thing here is that you do need to know what your book is about. You do need to feel comfortable, or whether you feel comfortable or not, you do need to write about yourself in self-praising ways. You need to write about your book in non-dry, non-unexciting ways. You need to be enthusiastic and excited about your book and find exciting things to say about your book. It does demand, now, someone is going to ask, and everyone is thinking, I don't want to market and promote. Okay, fine, we're all agreed. There's no one on the call who wants to market and promote. You nevertheless have to announce that you will do these things. Whether you do or not, who knows? We don't call that lying, we call that who knows. Who knows if you will do all of the things you announce that you intend to do, but you do need to announce that you intend to do marketing and promoting things. I'm saying 7 a little different from 6 because this is not just pledging about marketing and promoting, but you're making other kinds of pledges. That is that you're going to be available, that you're going to speak out in the world, that you're going to be a semi-public person. You're making all kinds of pledges in the proposal that I hope you can stand behind ultimately. And why wouldn't you? If you're an advocate for your book, I hope that you would decide that being an advocate for your book means that you will advocate for your book. Demands that you make certain hard choices. Who are you trying to interest in the book? What's the length of the book going to be? Maybe you think you have 150,000 words of material, but you're savvy enough to know that the marketplace only allows for a 75,000 word book in your genre. Okay, then you had better write a 75,000 word book, or you don't really have a chance in the marketplace. And 9 and 10 are 1 and 2 again, just to my version of underlining. It's time consuming and it's hard work. And so this is a drum roll. And so drum roll. I sort of feel like staying here on the drum roll. No, on we go. We're going to go over each one of these individually, but this is what goes into a book proposal. When I say a title page, obviously we're talking about a Word document, not a physical document, but this would be the first page of the Word document. So there's a title page, an overview of the project, an Amazon-like paragraph, a competing and complementary book list. I'm just going through this fast because we're doing each one of these slowly. Your credentials, your marketing and promoting ideas, markets for your book, a length and delivery announcement where you announce how long the book is or will be and when it will be done, endorsements, an annotated table of contents or a novel synopsis or a memoir synopsis, or some kind of detailed summary, a sample chapter or chapters, and then sometimes supporting materials. I'm just letting this sit here for a second. This is the thing that you're building. I think you can see how it's easy to envision a folder for each one of these 12 things. Actually, an old-fashioned file folder or a desktop folder for each of these things. Pretty simple to see how you could be making notes for each one of these things and dropping it into its file folder. So we begin with the title page. Your book's title, by the way, that matters. I just sold a book the other week where I had tried it out with different titles and editors were passing, and I changed the title and an editor bought it in 13 seconds flat. So the title matters. You may want to not use the title that you've been hooked on for the last 14 years that's now holding you hostage. It may not be the best title for this moment. In my way of working, I think it's a good idea to create a dozen or 20 titles because it's often the 14th title that's the best one. Try out a lot of titles, and then when you land on one, pass it by a few friends and say, does this work for you? This is a moment. There are lots of moments where you shouldn't show work to people because it's too early. This is a moment where I think it is good to get feedback, and that's on the title. For nonfiction, your book needs a subtitle that further explains what the book's about. Memoir and fiction do not need a subtitle. Your name, of course. And then this is secret number 1. It's really important to get an early endorsement for your idea or your book if it exists. But for nonfiction, remember, there's no book yet. So what you're getting an endorsement for is your idea. I want to write a book for coaches that explains the middle of a coaching session. Well, now you want to go find somebody to endorse that idea. So you go find some well-known coaches or just some everyday coaches, and you say, I'm working on a book that very clearly describes what goes on in the middle of the session. Don't you think that will be useful? And 7 out of 9 coaches will say, yes, I have no idea what to do in the middle of a session. I'd love that book. And then what do? Class, you hit reply and you say, may I quote you? It's that simple. You explain to folks what the book's about and say, isn't that interesting? Folks will reply, yes, that's interesting. And then you say, may I quote you? This is a quote that I got. I just sold this book, The Coach's Way, a couple of weeks ago. And this was an early endorsement I got for this book. You see how this on the title page does some good work? I'm not going to read it aloud. I'm sure you can all read it. Just going to pause here because this makes a difference. If lots of books are in that, if an editor is sitting there thinking 51% against, because she's going to be against all proposals because she's got too many, 51% against, 49% for, this gets her to 51% for. Next comes an overview of the project, which is typically about 500 words, page and a half, 2 pages. It's not a dry recitation of the project. It's not a summary of it. You're painting a picture of why this book would be wanted. And you're explaining, even though you're going to explain it again in the credentials section, you're explaining why you're the right person to write this book. I've been coaching for 35 years, blah, blah, blah. Or if it's fiction, I've loved Corsica all my life. I've traveled there 30 times. It was therefore a no-brainer to set my first novel in Corsica, blah, blah, blah. The overview makes a case. It's an argument for your book. And it needs some exciting language or exciting ideas. The language may not be exciting, but an exciting idea is there are going to be 5 million new readers for this genre in the coming months. That's an exciting idea. For that to be true, your book would be wanted. So this is the first paragraph from the Coach's Way book proposal. So it doesn't start with, my name is Eric Maisel and I'm a nice guy. It doesn't start there. It starts with something exciting or important. Coaching is booming. I could have put an exclamation point, but you know, we got to watch our exclamation points, etc. Some, so to speak, statistics, etc. You get the idea of how this works and how this is different from, I've written a very interesting book about blah, blah, blah. This is a writerly, intellectual, imaginative task, the overview. It's not a dry task. Oh, that's not how you spell excitement. Okay, that's an epic fail. It's closer to excrement, but that's not what we're dealing with here. God knows. Then lots of agents like an Amazon-like paragraph, which is sort of the condensation of the overview. This is the actual Amazon-like first paragraph for one of my books, Redesign Your Mind. This is the way it looks on Amazon. And you can see how this paragraph works. It's got a little bold, it's got the actual exclamation point. It's the sales paragraph that you would find on Amazon. I would say a couple of years ago, agents didn't ask for this paragraph. The overview was sufficient. Now I'm getting the request for this kind of paragraph kind of from everybody. They want to see how it's going to look on Amazon, so to speak. The next element of the book proposal is what's called the competing and complementary book section or list. This is not like the list you did when you did your PhD and had to find 150 references to buttress your arguments. This is just to present a little snapshot for an agent or an editor of your territory, little snapshot. I'd say 4 to 8 books would be sufficient. The main things are that they are good sellers. And if you locate them, that probably means they're good sellers. That is, if they come up first on an Amazon search or something, they're probably the best sellers in genre. Plus, I'm sure you all know that Amazon books come with numbers, and the smaller the number, the better it's doing in that split second. So if you see an Amazon number with 6 million, no one is purchasing that book. If you see an Amazon number with number 1, that's exciting. So I would say any book with a number under 10,000 is probably doing pretty darn well. So you might want to include books of that ilk, books with those kinds of numbers in this. And the task is to explain what that book's about in just a few words, two sentences, and then explain why your book is different from it, so to speak, better than it, or wanted, why your book, if that book exists, why yours? And I think you can see the language here. Wonderful Coaching is a wonderful book, and my book goes a step further by doing XYZ. Marvelous Coaching is a marvelous book, but my book does the following thing. One of the reasons you don't want to bash the books you're writing about is that the editor you're approaching may be the editor on that book, or the agent who represented that book. It's a small world. And if you have looked for an agent in a certain territory, then it's likely that she knows these books and knows the authors in this territory. So you're not trying to disrespect the books you're comparing and contrasting your book to. You're just trying to say what it does and what it doesn't do, and how your book does do that thing it doesn't do. And I would do a little paragraph on each of these, 2 or 3 sentences on each of these, do 6 of them, and you're done. So that would look, in a book proposal, that would look like about 1.5 pages of stuff. If you want to try to visualize what we're talking about here, it's not 15 pages of stuff. It's just 1.5 pages or 2 pages of this section. Next is the credentials section, usually called About the Author. By the way, I haven't mentioned it yet. It should be clear to you that you can be writing this in the 3rd person or the 1st person, right? That's your option. I write my book proposals in the third person because I find it easier to brag in the 3rd person. But I can imagine certain kinds of books, certain kinds of memoirs where it does not make sense to write in the 3rd person, where you would want to be saying, I had this experience and I had that experience. You might want to try out a section of the book proposal both ways and just see which sounds better to you or sounds more appropriate. So with respect to the credentials section, obvious things, your general credentials for writing this kind of book, or your general credentials as a writer, your specific credentials for writing this book, any other kinds of credentials that make sense to include, including any speaking engagements you've been engaged in. Maybe you give talks at work. That's relevant because that means you know how to talk. It means that you know how to stand on your own 2 feet and say things, that you're not like most of the world suffering from performance anxiety. All of that's relevant here. And then part of your credential section is you announcing that you have some enthusiasm for promoting. And you can say it that way. You can say I'm enthusiastic, or you can show that you're enthusiastic by already what's called building your platform. That is doing things in support of your book, like getting a branded blog somewhere. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this credentials section is also typically about 1.5 pages in length, maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs that do various kinds of work. Yes, you may scream looking at this. You are entitled to scream or shake your head or throw a dish or anything you like to do. There are a million marketing and promoting ideas that you could include in your marketing and promoting section. You need a marketing and promoting section. My advice is to pick 4 or 5 or 6 things that make sense to you to announce and announce them. To spend about a paragraph on each of the 4 or 5 or 6 things that you've decided you're willing to say you're going to do, and spend a paragraph on each. Some of these may make easy sense to you. Let's pick one that might make easy sense to you. Number 21, your local efforts. That might sound like, I live in New York. I'm going to make an effort to speak to groups in New York, and I'm going to make the book a good seller in the New York area. That may not sound like much, but that's exactly a marketing idea. By the way, with print runs, with first print runs diminishing and with print on demand and all of that, let's say that there is an initial print run of your book of 2,000 copies. We'll just pick a number. Print runs used to be, first print run used to be 15,000 copies, 10,000 copies, then it dwindled to 5,000 copies. Now it's often 2,000 copies or fewer. Well, if you can sell 200 copies of your book locally by doing a workshop here and a workshop there, you will have sold 10% of the first run, which is quite something. If you can sell that first run out, then your book's a success, irrespective of what the numbers are objectively. That all of those books sold is a great thing. That's all by way of saying even efforts that only sell a few books can matter. So let me just run through these super fast, just to give you a sense of what these mean. Obviously, we're not going to spend a ton of time here. Your personal list is like your newsletter list, the people you can reach. Most of the folks on this call probably have a list of a couple of hundred people. If you can get that up to several thousand, that's excellent. And also that's something that will be exciting for a prospective editor to hear, that you have a list of 5,000 or 10,000. That would be lovely to hear. All of your personal contacts, and those are people you're going to, we'll go to number 3, that you're going to announce the book to. And more than that, you're going to ask to announce to others. Degrees of separation. That is, you're going to ask your good friends to announce your book to their good friends. And you're going to be announcing this in your marketing section, that you're going to have this energy and enthusiasm to get everybody you know mobilized for the sake of your book. Obviously, you need a website. You don't want to perseverate on the website. Many writers think that there aren't 24 things to do, that is one thing to do, the website. The website is just one thing to do. And you don't want to get caught up at thinking that that's the most important thing or the only thing to do. It's one of many things to do. You might have a blog which reaches not too many people, but it still reaches some people, and that's fine. More importantly, I think you would want to be a featured blogger on some large entity. That's nicer to say than I have a personal blog. For instance, here's my standard line for me. I write the Rethinking Mental Health blog for Psychology Today with 3 million plus views. Now, you can't typically get 3 million plus views for your personal blog. So you want to reach out to big entities bravely, unselfconsciously, The Guardian, The New York Times, Psychology Today, I don't know, Glamour, I don't know what. Reach out and say, I want to be a featured blogger on your site. Everybody needs content. You may be surprised to discover that you are wanted. You might announce that you're going to create a self-created physical tour, maybe because you visit daughter 1 in Los Angeles each year and daughter 2 in Seattle each year and son 3 in London each year. Well, if you go there each year, you might as well say in a smart paragraph, I'm traveling to Los Angeles and Seattle and London each year, and I'm going to set stuff up there. Clear? You might create a virtual tour. I wish we had more time to talk about that. This is the idea of locating, for instance, bloggers who write in your territory and approaching them and saying, I'm running a blog tour. I'd like you to be a stop on my blog tour during the month of October. And you can have October 12th, and I'm going to show up and we're going to talk about the book, blah, blah, blah. I know I'm saying this very fast, and this may go in one ear and out the other. You may not understand what I mean by a virtual tour, but maybe we'll come back to it in the question time if there's a question about that. You can do some paid advertising. I do limited, but some paid advertising if I think it makes sense to me. You might schedule appearances of all sorts at conferences if you get to speak, etc. You understand what a scheduled appearance might be. You might run workshops and webinars. Of course, there's the obligatory Facebook, TikTok, dip-dop, pop, pop, all that stuff that you're supposed to say. What you might say is, I'm really enthusiastic about X, Instagram. I'm on it every day. I have lots of interaction with my Instagram followers, and I'm going to do a great job of selling the book on Instagram when it appears. Your professional contacts, organizations that might be interested in what you do. Let me just articulate number 14, because that may mean nothing to you. By a stunt, I mean some dramatic thing that you might try. For instance, I have a pal who talked the manager of the big Barnes & Noble across from Lincoln Center when it was there. I think it's gone now, but there was a big Barnes & Noble across from Lincoln Center. And he talked the manager into having him appear, the writer, appear half naked in a bathtub in a window of the Barnes & Noble, reading his book or writing his next book or something. That's a stunt. You may have no stunt energy. This may be appalling to you, but if the idea of stunts sound good to you, they can make a big difference. For you to announce that you're going to do this amazing, exciting, unusual thing could be very interesting. You might say that you're employing a team, or that you've already put together a team, a marketing team. Some writers do that. They have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people working for them. Obviously, that's a huge financial outlay. Even at virtual assistant hourly wages, that's still real money. So you might well not say that if you don't think, but if you have money, and maybe you already have a team for another reason, maybe you're running a coaching practice that's doing well, and you actually have a team of 3 or 4 or 5 people, well, then you would say, I have a team. That's exciting news, that you're going to be helped by people when the book arrives. You might, this is a separate conversation. You might begin to have a podcast, and you might look for a network who might be interested in your podcast. Separate idea to chat about. You might create, lots of people are doing this, you might create a conference where you invite 15 or 20 speakers to speak on the rough subject of your book. And you host that conference. Many people are trying to do this nowadays, and there's a formula for it, and etc. Editors are surprisingly interested in whether you can reach book clubs around the country and invite them to read your book for their book club. It always seems to me that that would be sort of small sales, almost hand selling. But I've noticed that editors like that. Maybe it just sounds personable and personal to them. So if you know anything about book clubs, if you can say, I think I can get my book into several book clubs, plus number 19, I'll then appear at those book clubs, excuse me, virtually. Hold on. That can work, to say that you will appear at book clubs. Number 20, you may create a gift or a giveaway to go with the launch of the book. That is, let's say your book is on reducing stress. You might have your special small 10-tip PDF that you will give to anybody on your list who purchases 5 copies of the book for themselves and their friends. That kind of basic advertising and marketing idea. Talked about your local efforts, that is that you will do a good job of promoting, of being with your book in your local area. Your various asks, that you're going to ask all kinds of people to be supportive of the book, and then any unique ideas that are not on this list. And then overall, what you're communicating in this section is your basic willingness to market and promote. I can see that I'm not going to end on the hour, folks. So I hope you can hang out to 90 minutes. And I don't think I can speak any faster. So we're going to go a ways. I'm going to start to move a little more quickly. So a section would be markets for your book. To say this simply, by the way, when you get the recording, you can go through these slides a little more slowly if I start to go quickly. You want to know who's going to potentially buy your book. You can read this at your leisure. This is important. You need a lengthened delivery announcement. That is, you need to say how long your book is or will be and when it will be done. So let's look at some of these. My wonderful self-help book will be 65,000 words in length. This is your estimate, your best guess, and will be available 8 months after contract signing. You're taking a guess as to when it will be done. The headline here is don't make that length too long, or else an editor will think that she can't picture where that book could fit in her list. She can't think that far ahead. So anything between 4 months, 6 months, 8 months is a safe thing to say in this sentence. But try not to say 12 months or 18 months. That's going to be off-putting. If it's a novel, then it's already done. So my wonderful novel is 85,000 words in length and available now. That'd be how that sounds. And if it's very close to being done, you could say something like my wonderful memoir will be, and it will be done. So you could be announcing that you're showing it a little early, but that you know it'll be done relatively quickly. Just as I mentioned at the beginning, where you want to get an early endorsement for the title page, you want to get lots of early endorsements. This is just you bravely reaching out to folks. So these are the steps to getting endorsements. I don't think I'll run down each one of them, but I think you'll get the idea when you get a chance to look at these. I'll let it just stay up on the screen for a moment so you get a quick sense of what this getting endorsements looks like. This is one of the major tasks of the book proposal, is saying a little something about every chapter of your nonfiction book, or creating a solid fiction or memoir synopsis, which summarizes your book. One of the best ways to do the nonfiction version is to say something like, in chapter 3, I cover XYZ, and then do a couple of bullets. Highlights of the chapter include ABC. This is a good way because it doesn't force you to know everything about your chapter. All it really requires is that you know a couple of headline things about your chapter. That's how that bullet list functions. So to repeat, you need to know the table of contents of your nonfiction book and present a paragraph or so about each chapter. And for your novel or your memoir, you need to create a 3 to 5 page summary, which will bore you to tears to write because it has no juice in it. It's this happened. Then they rode over the hill. Then the sidekick got shot. Ah, the sidekick is not dead. He got up. He got back on his horse. You're going to shoot yourself as you try to write this. But it's got to be done, and it's got to be done that way, in that summary way. This is not an imaginative task. This is a dry task. the big bulk of the book proposal, the thing that is many pages, is the sample chapter or the sample chapters. Let's just do some quick math. If your nonfiction book turns out to be about 75,000 words in length, and it's made up of 15 chapters, that means that each chapter will be about 5,000 words in length, which is hefty. And you would not need to show more than one or two of those in the sample. But I've been doing books with 65, 800 word chapters recently. Well, showing one or two of those 800 word chapters wouldn't be quite enough for an agent or an editor to get a good sense of the book. So there you might want to show 3 or 4 or 5 of those kinds of chapters. With respect to fiction or nonfiction, nobody knows exactly what the sample size ought to be. I'm putting here between 5,000 and 15,000 words. I think it's really your choice based on what works best for for your book. If part 1 ends brilliantly at 12,000 words and makes the reader desperately want to go on to part 2, that's the sample. You want your sample to be logical and powerful and want the reader to go on to the next chapter. So I would not worry too much if you look at some literary agent's website and she says, it must be 12,462 words, the sample. Don't worry about that. Give her the sample that makes most sense to you. You might include some supporting materials. You see what these are, a PDF of a workshop or a print interview that somebody's done with you, some things like that. Please don't include, this is important. Maybe you have a cover in mind already, maybe you're a designer type, you've already designed up the cover, don't show that. They'll find that a little insulting or dangerous. They'll find you a dangerous person who's going to interfere too much in the stuff they consider to be their stuff. So don't propose a cover, don't propose design elements, don't propose that the book needs to have photographs or charts or things. You can say it would be lovely if the book had 17 charts, but make it sound like you understand that it's their decision, not yours. Unless, of course, it must. If it's a biology book, anatomy of the heart, presumably you need some pictures of the heart. So, and anybody getting that book proposal would understand that. But if it's optional, opt out. Yeah, I'm sweating. So is this guy. We're all sweating. Okay. So can you skip this task? Sure. If you're famous, if you have 1 million social media followers, etc. By the way, you can just skip it and try to get lucky. There's an exception to every rule. Somebody may fall in love with your book without the book proposal, so the task can be skipped. You can pray to the gods of whimsy and say, gods of whimsy, I don't want to do this. Please sell the book without this. You can do that. I'm just pausing because the task really can't be skipped that well, but of course it can. Can, however, be shrunk. I'm giving you the largest size, the oversized. That size of fries that's really too big, but we still eat all the fries. This book proposal is that size of fries, the too large size. So you can do 4 competing books rather than 6 or 8, or half a page of credentials rather than a page and a half, etc. So this really can be shrunk, and shrunk is not such a bad idea because everybody's busy, and some agents and editors would appreciate the shrunken version of it. I just wanted you to understand the full-sized version, but it can be shrunk. Is it really necessary to do this for fiction or memoir? Much less so than for nonfiction. Because for fiction and memoir, it is still the case that ultimately you need an editor to fall in love with the book. That's still the case for fiction and memoir. It's about love. Nonfiction is about, is it a good idea and will it sell? That's an editor who publishes a lot of nonfiction is thinking, is it a good idea and will it sell? An editor who publishes a lot of fiction and memoir is thinking, do I love it? So let me repeat, I think this is a valuable task for the fiction writer and the memoir writer, but much less crucial than for the nonfiction writer. Let me just go through this slowly, and then we'll actually maybe end nearish on the hour, and then we can do questions. So here's the plan. It's going to take some willingness to tackle this task. You have to have a conversation with yourself where you get agreement from yourself that you're willing to do this. Then you need to get as organized as you can. I think what I've been saying about folders that connect to each of the elements of the book proposal makes sense. Individual folders for each of the chapters in your book. So if the book has 15 chapters, then you make 15 folders where you can drop notes in for chapter 1, chapter 5, etc. This task ain't happening if you don't schedule it into your real life. For lots of things, I advise clients to make it a daily practice. I don't think this is a daily practice kind of thing. I think it's too hard to crack the resistance every day to do this. But I do think it might be a weekly task, that kind of thing where you set aside 2 hours on a Saturday, you hold your nose and you work on this. That sort of task, but it does need to get scheduled into your real life. Unlike a big canvas where maybe you work all over the canvas, if you're a painter, you can do that with a book proposal and work a little bit over here and work a little bit over there. But in my experience, the elements don't get done that way. So you end up with lots of stuff for this section and lots of stuff for that section and an enormous amount of stuff, too much. And the amount of stuff you end up with is exhausting and you don't want to face it and you skip it. I think it's better to say to yourself, I'm working on the credentials section this week. Or I'm working on chapter 1 of the annotated table of contents this week. I'm working on creating one strong paragraph for the annotated table of contents this week. I'm going to really describe chapter 1 well. I'm just pausing because I want you all to sort of buy into this idea of getting bits done rather than being all over the place, dropping notes in. Then you want to polish that element, maybe even before moving on to the next element. That is, maybe you want to complete bits rather than producing a draft of the whole thing and then completing bits. The next item is clearly, then you go on to the next thing and then you make that bit good. Have some kind of mechanism, some super alarm going off on your phone or something where you notice that it's been 3 weeks and you haven't touched the proposal. Just, I'll say it the way I say it there. Notice if you're not working on the proposal. And if you are, have a chat with yourself. Maybe the chat is, I'm not going to do one. Or maybe the chat is, let me get back to it. Then you get it done in draft. I see I'm using the abbreviation for in. Get it done in draft, and then get it done. Let's see if there's any more. We might be right on the hour, in which case I'll be very proud of myself. There's a whole nother thing. Okay, we can spend a minute on this. So you have a book proposal. What are you going to do with it? Well, you identify agents you intend to contact, and there are lots of sources on the internet about where to find agent email addresses. I used to use, I don't know if it's still valuable, but I used to use a website called 1000literaryagents.com. That's the numerals 1000, 1000literaryagents.com. But there are a ton of resources out there which will give you information about agents and their email addresses. Editors are harder to find information about, and you typically don't want to contact them directly. You typically want to get an agent for yourself if you can. But Editors at medium-sized houses or small-sized houses or university presses or niche presses, you can find their information and you might approach them directly. You would create a super strong query email with a super strong subject line so that the query gets opened. You want to be imaginative in your subject line so that the query mail gets opened. And then you want a query email that explains what the book's about, who you are, and why it might be wanted or why it is wanted. I advise folks to send to multiple agents and not get attached to some agent and send to only one agent, but rather to send to 12 agents or 20 agents at once. Because mostly we're going to get rejection or more usually silence. Agents are super busy and they're scrolling through hundreds of emails. And so it's a numbers game. And I think it's wise to approach lots of agents at once. But you might, number two, you might send to just a select number of agents. Go that route first, your 4 or 5 or 6 top choices first. Or if you, of course, if you have a connection, or if there's just somebody you really want, you could send to a single agent or editor, but don't wait too long. If you hear nothing back in 3 weeks, you should be moving on to the idea of multiple agents or multiple editors. Waiting is taxing. So while you wait, try to stay alive, try to breathe, and keep writing, either on this book or the next book or whatever. When you get a form rejection, know that it means nothing. Doesn't matter what its wording is. It says nothing about the goodness of your book. If you get a rejection that says, "Thank you so much for submitting. I'm sure your book will find a wonderful home. It can't be our home, but good luck." Zero meaning. You don't know if the agent's in hospital. You don't know what's going on. So don't read anything into that. If you get a personal rejection, then you want to ascertain if there's some way to make a connection there. You're not looking at the negatives like, oh, she didn't love it. You're trying to figure out if reading between the lines, if there's something she's actually asking for from you. There may be a line that you read too quickly that says something like, you know, if you covered XYZ, I might actually be interested. You don't want to miss that line in that email. You would hit reply and say, oh, if I cover X, Y, and Z, might you be interested? That is, you want a kind of confirmation about what you just read, but that's what you would do with a personal rejection, is not take it as rejection, but take it as an overture, as a possibility to future interaction. Silence means nothing, zero. Don't read anything into silence. Seriously, you have no idea how many emails and how many things agents and editors are doing in a given day. You have no idea. So when there's interest, you would, of course, breathe, catch your breath, respond with a quick thank you that doesn't say anything much more than thank you. Thanks so much. Let me get back to you tomorrow with my thoughts. So you would acknowledge that you received the email and just say thank you, and then think overnight about what you want to say or any questions you might want to ask. You might want to check in on, maybe you're not sure about this agent. Maybe you've looked at this agent's website and you're not positive that she's sold enough books or the right kinds of books. So you may want to ask her for an updated list of her sales. There might be some questions you have. The main thing is to overnight give it some thought as to what this interest means and how you want to respond to this interest. And then when you ultimately connect with an agent, let her do her work, give her a break. You'll have typically one conversation with her, either an email conversation or an actual conversation where the two of you talk about stuff, and she'll be enthusiastic until she isn't. So in the beginning, she will be enthusiastic. Then when she starts sending it around and it starts getting rejected, her enthusiasm will wane. That's natural. So the first conversation you have with this agent will be enthusiastic. So have a lovely time and then relax and let her do her work. So if you'd like to work with me on a book proposal, just drop me an email and let's chat. I do nonfiction book coaching, and that's at this link. And for all my other stuff, you know where to go, which is me.com. So thank you. I think, what do I do next? Do I just turn it over to you, Ron? Or maybe I'll stop the share. I think I will stop the share. That sounds exciting. Look at all these people. Okay. We have people, and Ron, can you speak?
Yes, I'm able to speak.
Okay, then guys, we'll go till 10:30 if anybody has the stamina to stay put. And Ron will ask me questions that appeared in the chat if there were questions, and if there weren't, we'll do the hands raised thing. But first, any questions?
Okay, so first we have Paula, and she asks, will we be able to print the book proposal document that Eric is basing the workshop on?
Let me think about that. I think that means that I have to turn it into a PDF, which is not hard. It just gets turned into. I think the short answer is yes. If you would like the PDF of this, drop me an email to ericmaisel@hotmail.com. Sooner or later, meaning not this afternoon, but sooner or later, I'll turn it into a PDF and make it available.
Okay. Tony had a question. I have a draft ready to submit to an editor already. Have I shot myself in the foot for not having written and submitted a proposal yet?
Could you say the beginning of that again? A draft of what? What did she say? Nonfiction or fiction or memoir?
Tony didn't say. You want to offer, Tony?
Sure. It's a nonfiction book. It's intended to be a textbook to be taught in university level.
Well, we don't use violent imagery like shoot yourself in the foot, but it's not brilliant to not have the book proposal. I would do a shrunken book proposal as fast as humanly possible, where you do some of the things that I've been describing in this talk. I do many, even small presses, university presses, academic presses, have their version of a book proposal form that's often their submission site on their site, and they ask for certain things. It's extra complicated because in certain worlds, in the university press world, the academic press world, they circulate the book proposal to readers, usually 3 peers, and you have to get approval from the peers that the book's worth publishing. So typically you do have to produce the book proposal for that reason alone, that it gets circulated to peer reviewers. Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have a couple of questions from, I believe it's Ileana. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If you already have self-published your book, can you do a book proposal for publishers to do a new edition?
The short answer is yes. I don't want to pause there and act like I don't know the answer. The short answer is yes. What I'm pausing about are some of the details of how to do that. If the self-published book has, we'll call them, as they say in the business, not good numbers, like it sold 400 copies, which we think is great, but a New York publisher is not going to think it's great. It is not going to be exciting to say my book has sold 400 copies. Are you interested? Conversely, here's the tricky part. Conversely, if your book has sold 15,000 copies, those are good numbers. But here's what an editor is going to think. The book's already reached its audience. The 15,000 people interested in it have purchased it. So it's a little tricky how to present a self-published book to a traditional publisher or agent. It's not that it's impossible, and it should be done. It can be done, but you have to be extra smart about the languaging of that and really explain why a traditional publisher would want to pick it up. What just happened? Did suddenly all of China get interested in your book, or did something exciting happen to make it a viable project for a traditional publisher? In other words, I think it's an extra hard task to move a self-published book to the traditional publishing arena, but not at all impossible.
Another question, can you do a book proposal for your self-published book to be translated into another language? Example, the book is in French and you want it to be published in English.
The short answer is yes. Most self-published authors don't have the wherewithal to connect with I want to say foreign presses. They're not foreign to themselves, but to other presses. But if you know how to do that, and if you want to know how to do that, that editor at an Italian house or a French house or a German house needs exactly the same information that an editor at a London house or a New York house needs. So yes, creating a book proposal, and also, of course, indicating why the book in that language would be wanted. For instance, were I to approach a Korean publisher about one of my books, it would be crazy for me not to say, my books are popular in Korea. 6 or 7 or 8 of them have been translated in Korean. It would be silly of me not to forget to mention that kind of factoid. So you want to explain why the book is not only wanted, but wanted in that language.
Next question, what is a virtual tour?
So let's say you have a book on stress reduction coming out. And so you use one of those search engines that identifies top bloggers about stress reduction. Maybe you find some list like 20 top blogs on stress reduction. You go find the contact, you find the email address or contact information for those 20 bloggers. You create a form email, which says, I have a book coming out on stress reduction. Your audience is going to be so interested in it. I'm going on tour with my book, on a virtual tour for the month of October 2022. What this means is I'm going to stop at different bloggers' blogs, websites, on a date certain, on a given date. You get to pick the date. And on that date, we're going to maybe go live, or maybe we'll do a template interview, or we'll do something interesting together. And this gives you content for that day, something interesting for your website, and it's good for my book. And so you would get, this is what I'm describing as work, of course. You get that it's work, but it's interesting work to me. And so you gather 10, 5, maybe you do it for a week. Maybe you do it for the Van Gogh Blues. I did a 60-day blog tour that I organized, and it sold out the first edition, which in those days was a bigger number than first printings today. Those were real numbers, maybe 5 or 10,000 copies or something. So that's in short what are, and there are now Twitter tours and Facebook tours and I don't know what else. I'm aware of and probably podcast to wherever there's a social medium or social media, there's probably a way to create a tour in that medium.
Next question, how do you know all the information that you have to give for the book proposal without writing the book?
You are writing the book. You're not completing the book. That is, you're working on the book and know stuff. I now can write a book proposal that sells before I write a word of the book. I can do that. Most writers can't. You have to work on the book to know your book. And books morph. It's really important that I say this about 50 times, though we don't have time for that. But books morph. You think you're doing a book about great retirement cities, and it turns out to be a book about your dog. You thought it was about retirement cities, but it was actually about your dog, where your dog wants to retire. And you may not know that till 6 weeks into writing the book. You're going, oh, well, Baton Rouge. Oh, my dog doesn't want to be there. Too humid. So books morph. And so it's hard to write the book proposal in the first days, but at my inner language is when the book settles down, you can do the book proposal. I know that that's not clear language, but it has meaning for me, and maybe it's clear enough. When the book's rushing around morphing, it's hard to write the book proposal. When it settles down, that's the time you can do it.
Next question. If a publisher asks you to work with them to create a new book, do you still need to do all of this?
I'm not sure what new book means there. Do you mean a sequel or a different version of, who asked that, whoever asked that question,
That
do you mean?
was Ileana, if I've got that right.
Yeah, Ileana, do you mean?
Different version.
Yes.
Different version she offers.
Different version, like
Oh,
they like what you do and they
Gotcha,
just want to
gotcha,
work
no.
with you.
No, okay, gotcha. So let me say this a little slowly. First, the agent who represents you may not represent you until you've made changes. So there may be changes there. An agent may say, I love this proposal, but you need to change ABC. Then you get to decide if you're going to change ABC. That's your decision, of course. But at some point, the agent is satisfied and there's a book proposal that gets submitted. Then the agent starts to get responses from editors. And the editor might say to the agent, I love this. It's a great book about the future of food, but it does not cover carrots well enough. I love carrots. And if this book only covered carrots better, I'd really be interested. Your agent will communicate that to you. You don't need another book proposal. You just need to think through, do you want to cover carrots or not? If in this situation, you're 82% to a sale, if you're agreeable, if you say carrots are hell, if you refuse to talk about carrots, then you're not 82% to a sale. But if what is being asked of you is plausible to you or possible, then at some point pretty quickly, your agent will say to you, let me get out of the middle of this. Why don't you have a conversation with editor Mary and work this out? And have Mary come back to me when you guys are agreed, and then we'll work on the contract. So you do not need, if you're working with an agent or an editor on tinkering with the book or the proposal, you don't need multiple book proposals.
Hey, Stephanie has a question. Do we send the book proposal to a literary agent when we introduce ourselves to let them know we have a book idea for them? Question. Also, did you suggest not to send this book proposal to editors or publishing houses? Correct? Just literary agents. So she's looking for clarification.
Let me do the second first. No, I'm not saying don't send to editors. What I'm saying is you can't reach New York editors. And there are lots of editors you can't reach. But you can, like Georgia Hughes at New World Library has been my editor there for I'm not sure how long, 20 years. I've done 15 books with them. She's reachable. New World Library in Novato, California is what's called a medium-sized press. But they have bestsellers like, drum roll, The Power of Now is their book. So they know how to do books that sell. But George is also accessible. You could find her email address somehow, and you could write her an email and she would respond in some time. So the short answer there is if you can get to an editor, then it's fine to approach editors, especially if you're really doing a book in their wheelhouse. If it's a niche publisher and you're certain that your book, like I have a pal who does books on acting for animators. There are only 4 presses in the world that can publish his kind of book. And he knows what those publishers are, and he can reach them. But even if you can reach editors, it gets confusing if you are trying to reach an editor and simultaneously an agent, because the agent may get annoyed that you've reached out to editors. So I would say in general, it's better to try to get agent representation and not go to editors. But I break my own rule there all the time. And what was the first question?
I think it was just a confirmation. Do we send the book proposal to a literary agent when we introduce ourselves to them to let them know we have a book idea for them?
I'm not sure if the question is whether that you actually attach it or whether you ask if they want to see it, but let me act as if that's the question. I think nowadays folks have gotten a little easier opening attachments from unknown people, but I don't think that's a slam dunk. So I think that you probably don't want to attach the book proposal. Rather, you want to announce that it exists and would they like to see it. So it would sound like I'm working on this wonderful book. blah, 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 blah. Would you be interested in seeing the book proposal? It's complete at this moment.
Stephanie has another question. How do we find appropriate literary agents for our book? Is it as simple as Google searching them?
It's almost as simple as that. As I say, I think that the site I mentioned, 1000literaryagents.com, is a good starting place. I don't know all the URLs. I don't know the links to all the different places one could go, but there are lots of resources out there. Let me just put a period there. The short answer is it is as simple as a search. By the way, personally, I don't think you need to know too much about an agent before you query them, because you're not connecting with them in your initial salvo. And so you don't really need to know how good they are. If they're interested in you, then you would do your due diligence, but it's a little too cumbersome and disenergizing to try to do due diligence on each agent you approach beforehand. I'm personally more inclined to do the shotgun approach of sending out, this is not me anymore, but I mean, if I were advising somebody, it would be to send out to 20 agents without really figuring out who they are too well. And then if somebody's interested, then you would try to discern if they're right for you, primarily by checking their website for lists of recent sales. That's usually the easiest way to figure out what's going on. By the way, if you're not sure about an agent, you can always, and this is true, you don't have to worry about this being too pushy. You can always ask to talk to one of their current clients and speak to a client and see what kind of experience the client is having with the agent.
Okay, and that takes care of our questions that have been typed in the chat.
Okay, well, we have a minute or two, although I'm nearing the end of my wherewithal. So I think maybe I'll just think if I have any last thing to say. There will be a recording at some point. There should also be a PDF at some point. Please don't not write books because you don't want to write book proposals. You can decide to be the exception and decide that the gods of whimsy will smile on you, whether or not you do a book proposal. So I don't want this to be disenergizing or dismotivating. It's just, this is a really useful tool for the writer, but don't not write because you don't want to not do a book proposal. Okay, guys, thanks a lot. I shall hit end, which I think probably means end. Ron, any last thing you want to say about anything in your world?
No, it was fun. Thanks for having me here. It was great.
Okay, guys, thanks a lot. Au revoir, à bientôt, tout à l'heure.
Take care.